Inga maha, inga rio, raurangatira mā, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Ko Peter Denny, ko Lady Nugent te waka o te tipuna, e whānau mai a hau ki Papi e oia, kei o tutahi e noho ana. Ko kaihautu te ka hauatanga mo te kāhui tika tāngata ki Aotearoa a hau. Ko Prudence Walker a hau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for your invitation to join today. I'm excited about the theme of your discussions, and I'm only sorry I wasn't able to attend the rest of the conference. I'm sure you've had a thought-provoking couple of days and believe the sharp focus on action is exactly what's needed now to spur us into being collective, collaborative, and courageous. While I'm new to the role of Kaihautu Hauatanga Disability Rights Commissioner, having joined Te Kāhui Tika Tāngata, the Human Rights Commission, in June, as a disabled person, I'm far from new to the barrier that society creates and that negative attitudes and ableist systems uphold. We need bold measures if we are serious about achieving equity for the approximately 1.1 million New Zealanders, including 1 in 3 Māori who are disabled. In my role, I'm tasked with protecting and promoting the rights of disabled people to access services, assert their rights, and participate fully in society. I do this through advocacy, championing the rights and needs of disabled people, challenging discrimination, and raising awareness to foster a more inclusive society. Influencing policy, influencing and shaping policies and strategies to ensure they are equitable and to cater to the diverse needs of disabled people. Monitoring and reporting, assessing the inclusion of disabled people, providing insights and holding the government accountable. Collaboration, engaging with government agencies, disabled people's organisations and non-government organisations, as well as international partners, to promote a collaborative approach to disability issues. The Commission itself was established through the provisions of the Human Rights Act. The Commission provides information and, if needed, free mediation for human rights and discrimination cases that are covered by the Human Rights Act 1993. The responsibilities of the Commission are set out in this Act. They are to advocate and promote respect for human rights, to encourage harmonious relations, to promote racial equality and cultural diversity, to promote equal employment opportunities, including pay equity, and to promote and protect the full and equal enjoyment of human rights by disabled people. One of the Commission's primary functions under the Human Rights Act is to promote, by research, education and discussion, a better understanding of the human rights dimensions of the Treaty of Waitangi and their relationship with domestic and international human rights law. Aotearoa New Zealand has an obligation to Te Tiriti o Waitangi to act in partnership with Māori, respect and enable tino rangatiratanga, and make sure the Crown's obligations to tangata whenua are met. The Commission's obligations within this framework mean ensuring tangata whaikaha Māori who are disabled, are partners and have agency in the process of advocacy and representation. Internationally, our country has signed up and made commitments to a range of human rights instruments, including the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. New Zealand signing the Disability Rights Convention creates a statutory obligation to advance the human rights of disabled people. It also means watchdogs like the Human Rights Commission, the UN Convention Review Committee, and the Independent Monitoring Mechanism, which is made up of the Commission, disabled people's organisations, and the Ombudsman, can monitor the government's performance, consult with disabled people, and report on progress towards our obligations. Recommendations to the government must then be publicly reported on in New Zealand and at an international level. As I will talk to, while some progress has been made, there's still a long way to go before we can say that disability rights are truly upheld in this country. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we've had a long-held myth about our country being fair, inclusive and equitable, but that myth was busted a long time ago for tangata whenua, Pacifica, and the marginalised population groups that are othered by society and current systems. Disabled people and tangata whaikaha Māori face widespread inequity and discrimination. Society's attitudes to disability are reflected in disabled people having higher unemployment rates, higher rates of poverty, worse housing conditions, inequitable access to healthcare and inclusive education, and poorer health outcomes. Disabled people as a population group do not have uniform and equitable access to funded disability supports. Disability supports are not provided based on need, but instead divided across government agencies and origin of impairment, meaning access to supports, to living and participating in the community are a matter of a diagnosis lottery. Disabled people are overrepresented in the care and protection, youth justice and prison populations, and do not have universal access to reasonable accommodation, meaning the specific support an individual may need to ensure equity. These inequities are disproportionately compounded for tangata whaikaha Māori, breaching New Zealand's founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. When compared to non-disabled people, disabled people are likely to indicate they do not have enough money to meet everyday needs, and tangata whaikaha Māori are 3 times as likely. Sorry, that just for clarity, that was disabled people are twice as likely, and disabled Māori are 3 times as likely. Although disabled people are the majority of people receiving social welfare payments, almost none of the recommendations of the Independent Welfare Expert Advisory Group have been implemented 3 years after the release of their report. In particular, the recommendation for further work on how to address the costs associated with disability and health conditions. Meanwhile, despite the child wellbeing strategy requiring regard to the Disability Convention, latest figures show poverty decreasing for some children, but 5 of the 9 measures of hardship and poverty increased for children living in a household with a disabled person. So that may be that the child is a disabled child, or that one of the parents are, or whānau. We cannot afford to keep nibbling at the edges of policy to change things. We must look to bold actions led by disabled people. And central to this, we must raise the voices of tangata whaikaha Māori and support and resource them to find their solutions and fulfil their needs and aspirations. Dr. Tristram Ingham, Associate Professor of Medicine at Otago Whakaihu Waka, University of Otago, addressed the UN Disability Convention Committee in 2022 as tangata whaikaha Māori. Dr. Ingham described the systemic invisibilisation of tangata whaikaha Māori through government data, policy, decision-making, voice mechanisms, monitoring and accountability. Tāngata whaikaha Māori are impacted by intersectional forms of discrimination and vulnerabilities, yet nothing is in place to systemically and adequately address the compounding impacts of ableism, racism, and ongoing realities of colonisation faced by Tāngata whaikaha Māori. Dr. Ingham said that the ability for Māori to have a voice amongst disabled people's organisations is severely constrained. There has only ever been one Māori organisation that was part of the independent monitoring mechanism on New Zealand's progress of realising the Disability Rights Convention, and they are no longer part of that group. There are no formal endorsement or mandating mechanisms in Aotearoa that secure a position for Tāngata whaikaha Māori in monitoring, nor in any nationally representative manner in realisation of the UN Disability Rights Committee. To quote Dr. Ingham, any Tāngata whaikaha Māori voice amongst our independent monitoring mechanism is there by luck alone. Luck as a strategy for the upholding of human rights, such as those contained in the UNCRPD and the UNDRIP, is not and will never be appropriate, sufficient, or effective. He also drew the committee's attention to the new health and disability system, providing no requirement to include the voices of Tāngata whaikaha Māori specifically in any of the advisory groups, partnership boards, or the board of the Māori Health Authority, Health New Zealand, or within the Ministry of Health. This falls well short of the obligations under Article 4.3 of the Convention for genuine partnership with Tāngata whaikaha Māori. There isn't any legislated or policy requirement mandating the collection and reporting on data capable of fully articulating the intersectional inequities experienced by Tāngata whaikaha Māori within health or anywhere across government for that matter. The Waitangi Tribunal is starting to look into issues for disabled people as part of an inquiry into breaches on the treaty in relation to health services and outcomes. This has the potential of being a landmark decision for Tāngata whaikaha Māori and their rights, but the transformative changes to the health system have occurred ahead of and separately from addressing these issues. Oops. To fully uphold and safeguard the rights of Tāngata whaikaha Māori under Te Tiriti o Waitangi and UNDRIP, as well as the UNCRPD, Dr. Ingham called for active and genuine partnership with Tāngata whaikaha Māori communities and their visibility in data, policy, decision-making, platforms for their voices, and monitoring accountability, a call that I very much support. There are many articles of UNDRIP and the UNCRPD that relate to health and wellbeing directly and indirectly, and these are tools for community and for all of us in our work to back up our advocacy and to uphold the rights of Tāngata whaikaha Māori and disabled people. We still face barriers in our day-to-day living, just being able to access the world around us and what we need to do, which all contribute generally to our overall poor health and wellbeing outcomes. In terms of barriers in health specifically, there are many, such as some disabled people not being able to get smears because GP practices do not have an accessible way to do this for them. Disabled pregnant people being encouraged or even booked in for, without their knowledge, abortions or assumed that they are not capable of being parents. Our general health not being considered in the context of our existing impairments, lack of accessible health communications, power imbalance in systems and in health-related relationships, being dismissed as being of less value or not having our health needs taken seriously, and consistently having to prove ourselves and our impairments, most often lifelong, to access things such as benefits, disability support services, rehabilitation and habilitation services, and the list goes on. We have the equitable right, as others do, to the highest attainable standard of health. We know our bodies, and we need yours and everyone's support to uphold our voices. We cannot leave achieving equity for disabled people, tāngata whaikaha and Māori and their whānau to luck alone. We need bold action, collective, collaborative and courageous action to make the changes needed. So I ask you, within your roles, your circles and your communities, your organisations, how do we have a voice? Kia ora. Kia ora.
Tēnei te mihi atu kia koe e te rangatira Prudence. Promoting and protecting the rights of tāngata, whaikaha and disabled New Zealanders. Thank you for your kōrero this afternoon, your advocacy, having policy influence, monitoring and reporting, and reminding us again about collaboration. We do have some time to ask questions, so maybe I throw it out to the audience. Are there any questions that you might want to raise? Anything?
Everybody's always scared to ask questions when it comes to disability.
Well, I guess, Prudence, I just, awareness raising, you talked about that. You talked about how, like raising awareness. You talked about us being bold and collaborating and, some of those steps. Sometimes it's the bridge between where we are to where we've got to be. And I guess it's the practical steps, so if we go away from here, what are some of the things that we can take back? What are some of the things that we can, start straight away when we move back into our workplaces and we think about Prudence and what message did she send to us? And, is it that we start designing policies? Or, are there some things that we can take back tomorrow when we go back to mahi?
I think, realising that what I've had to say today is really only an introduction and people, of course, will have different levels of knowledge and confidence around disability and disability rights. I think the kind of simple message that I would say is to think about including that voice of disabled people. So, of course, thinking about accessibility and everything that is done in the organisations that you work in or the work you do, but also about, how you include the voice of disabled people to influence the way that you do things. Because, like I say, we know many of the issues and we know our bodies, and it's not that every disabled person has found their voice to do that or has good advocacy skills, but at a systemic level, whatever that system is, like just your organisation system or the wider systems, to make sure that you're hearing from disabled people about their needs. Not one disabled person, but many disabled people.
Kia ora. Any other questions for Prudence?
There's one over there.
Does someone have a mic? Yeah, Karori, you can talk.
As myself, but without a physical disability, I find spaces where I have upper whānau are in this that we put typically from volunteer. And I find that you might get a person who touches on where we look to find that space. You're aware of my area, but also in that position, really connecting to each other to help grow that community of champions, I guess. So you guys in that space would be massively appreciated.
Kia ora. I'm not too familiar with the community, specifically in Te Tai Takaro, but what I would say in general about finding our people is to, look to disabled persons organisations. And so there are 6 disabled persons organisations that make up the DPO coalition in New Zealand, but there are also other disabled persons organisations who are not part of that, because they are organisations that are predominantly focused on upholding the rights of disabled people and are predominantly led and managed by disabled people, sort of whatever size they are. That's the kaupapa of them. As a disabled person myself, I think that I find, of course I would say this in this role, but, I find knowing about my rights and connecting with other disabled people and having the opportunity to discuss our rights as really, I don't like the word empowering, but I'll use it, really mana enhancing to be able to do that and know that it's not just something you're imagining in your head. It's actually other people might be experiencing similar things, whether it be a physical impairment or an impairment that's obvious to other people or not. Many of us actually are not, I'm not always using my mobility scooter. People tend to think that disability looks like one thing, when actually it looks like a whole lot of things and doesn't look like anything. There are many people who identify as disabled people who somebody from visual appearances, you can't tell that. So we can't make those assumptions. But I think the other thing about aside from the connecting with community, the other thing about what we can do is actually think about how to make things accessible and as inclusive as possible, because actually it's not up to me or any other disabled person to come to any space, be it a physical space or not a physical space, and need to verbalise my needs in order to have my rights upheld. It's actually up to all of us to ask ourselves, well, how are we upholding the rights of disabled people, and how is this as accessible as possible, realising that sometimes those needs are competing and sometimes it's hard to know how to respond to those, but it starts with really questioning ourselves, all of us, and asking what we can do.
Kia ora, Prudence. Well, tēnei te mahi atu kia koe te rangatira. Could I please have another round of applause for Prudence Walker?
Kia ora.